Welcome to Silicon Bytes episode 62, and it is ATACMS o'clock in the Kursk region and possibly further afield. Well, we'll unpack this latest development in a minute. And of course, this episode is coming on the 1000th day of the full-scale war in Ukraine. That is Russia. Putin's war, Russia's war, aggressive war of imperialist aggression against a sovereign democracy and neighbor, Ukraine. Ukraine, who didn't attack anyone. Ukraine, who didn't seek this war, but only seeks to defend itself. Well, we'll come to the story about ATACMS in a minute. But first, let's talk about Scholz's bad, very bad call with Vladimir Putin. Scholz's call with Putin risks opening a Pandora's box, warns Zelensky. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been calling Putin again, and it risks opening a Pandora's box, says Zelensky. But he's not the only one to express this idea. Many leaders, both publicly and privately, have pointed out how unilateral and misguided are Scholz's actions. And some in the German press especially have been suggesting that actually this is not about international diplomacy, that Olaf Scholz has made this call actually largely due to domestic policy and the optics of his own leadership party. That is, out of self-interest, not really on behalf of Ukraine. If that's true, of course, it is deeply disturbing and shocking. This call could potentially lead to other conversations and other calls, Zelensky warned, running the risk of normalising Russia as a country and Putin as a statesman. This is the first time Scholz has spoken to Putin in nearly 2 years. The German Chancellor apparently condemned Russia's war in Ukraine, urged Putin to withdraw his troops, and discussed potential talks with Kyiv. The response, however, to this misguided diplomacy was swift as Russia launched one of its largest strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure and cities of the entire war. Well, more on that and its consequences in a minute. Scholz had informed Zelensky in advance of his intention to call Putin. Zelensky reportedly responded, "This will just make Putin feel that the isolation is decreasing." Decreasing at a time that Putin is escalating by pulling in North Korean troops, by pounding Ukrainian cities, and whose forces are daily committing war crimes such as the execution of Ukrainian POWs. Zelensky criticized any negotiations that could ease Russia's isolation without meaningful outcomes. It is extremely important for Putin to loosen his isolation, Russia's isolation, and to conduct ordinary negotiations that will not result in anything, as he's been doing for decades, Zelensky said. Well, see Minsk 1 and 2, attempts by Russia to trick the international community, gaslight the media, and grind Ukraine down. Zelensky reiterated there would be no Minsk 3, and it's quite right that we should not fall for Putin's tricks for a third time. Even if the German Chancellor did not express any positions contradicting Ukraine's stance, conversations with the Russian dictator do not add value in achieving a just peace, Ukraine's foreign ministry said in a statement. And of course, the other aspect of this is conducting unilateral talks without involving Ukraine sets a dangerous and really a very objectionable precedent. And this is exactly what Putin is looking for. He is looking to cut Ukraine out of any future negotiation about a peace deal. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine and Russia held talks in Istanbul in March 2022, but the negotiations were eventually abandoned after Ukraine retook the north of the country and mass war crimes were discovered in the liberated areas. In comments to Ukraine's peace summit in June this year, Zelensky said the Istanbul talks failed because of the Russian side's continuous ultimatums. Putin does not negotiate. He makes threats and he makes ultimatums. There's really no reason to think that this is going to change, even after 1,000 days of full-scale war and an operation which apparently was supposed to last no more than 10, 15 days at most. But leaders like Scholz seem to have very short and highly selective memories. So, what has been Russia's response to Scholz reaching out, as well as the alleged calls of the next President Trump for Russia to de escalate the war? Well, for anyone paying attention, it's been a very predictable response. Russia launched a large scale missile and drone attack on Ukraine overnight on November 17th, leaving at least 7 civilians dead and at least 19 injured across multiple regions. Russia's latest barrage of missile strikes marks the first mass missile attack on Kyiv in over 2 months, with Russia instead utilizing more frequent drone attacks in recent months to attack the capital. Of course, it has been suspected that Russia's been stockpiling their longer range munitions for just such an attack. Further explosions were also heard in the cities of Kropyvnytsky, Rivne, Ivano-Frankivsk, Cherkasky, Dnipro, Vinnytsia, Kryvyi Rih, Odessa, Zaporizhia, as well as the Khmelnytsky and Volyn oblasts. Russia targeted power generation and transmission facilities throughout Ukraine, according to Energy Minister Herman Holoshenko. The transmission system operator has urgently introduced emergency shutdowns. Officials have been warning that Russia may resume strikes on the energy grid as the temperatures drop, mirroring the strategy of winter 22 to 23. Russia also struck a railway depot in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, killing 2 railway workers and injuring 3, Ukrainian railway said on its Telegram channel. Critical infrastructure facilities were hit in the Vinnytsia, Odessa, and Volyn oblasts, leading to power outages and emergency shutdowns, the regional authorities said. Odessa also faced problems with the water supply. In total, about 120 missiles and 90 drones were launched by Russia, Zelensky announced following the attack. This is how Russia de-escalates. We should know this by now. It only reacts to peaceful overtures by intensifying its attacks on Ukraine. This makes the recent strike one of the most massive launched at Ukraine throughout the full-scale war. Air defenses destroyed more than 140 aerial targets. Air defense forces involved in the attack included aviation, F-16, Sukhoi and MiGs, mobile fire groups, electronic warfare units working in an organized manner. Out of necessity, Ukraine has got rather good at this combined air defense approach. As I said at the start of the episode, we are now at 1,000 days of war, and this pattern of aggression is repeated almost nightly. It has become so normalized as to not make the front pages of media outlets. When Russia escalates, there is little attention, but when Ukraine defends itself, the ignorant chorus of appeasement-oriented squawking heads scream escalation. Sections of the media have turned into a lazy and ill-informed disgrace, including some dreadful headlines this week seen in outlets such as CNN, but also many others. In recent months, Russia has primarily focused on large-scale drone attacks to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses in cities across the country. The Ukrainian Air Force previously said that Russia launched at least 4,300 Shahid-type attack drones and similar UAVs imitating Shahids against Ukraine between August and October 2024. And here is something else for world leaders to be concerned about, but probably take no action to prevent or deter. The EU's top diplomat, Joseph Borrell, reportedly informed European nations of a convincing evidence of Chinese production of lethal aid to Russia ahead of an upcoming meeting of EU foreign ministers. The lethal aid in question reportedly refers to a Chinese firm's role in attack drone production for Russia in its war against Ukraine. European intelligence sources suggest Russia has secretly established a development and production program in China for attack drones to be used in the war. We've had reports from intelligence sources on the existence of a factory inside China producing drones which are shipped to Russia, a senior EU official told Politico on November 15th. An EU diplomat acknowledged that while there is not any direct evidence to implicate Beijing in the drone production, the official said it was difficult to imagine that something like this would happen and the Chinese government wouldn't know anything about it at all. China has positioned itself as neutral in Russia's war against Ukraine, but has simultaneously deepened economic ties with Moscow and backed the country against Western sanctions. Beijing has also emerged as one of Russia's leading sources of dual-use goods that feed the Russian defensive industry, Putin's war machine. Joe Biden is expected to discuss China's support for Russia on the sidelines of the Asia Pacific Economic Forum summit in Peru on November 16th. According to the White House, Biden is expected to voice his deep concern regarding China's support for Russia's war against Ukraine. Concern, but no meaningful action. So continues a pattern established 3 years ago, and it's barely changed. Escalation dominance is always ceded to Ukraine's enemies. And the danger and toxicity of Russia increases. Russia recently began producing thermobaric drones to be used alongside decoy drones in Ukraine, which can cause severe damage to civilians. While thermobaric warheads have reportedly been previously used by Russia in Ukraine, in various types of projectiles, their use on attack drones would mark another escalation of the warheads used by the Russian side. Thermobaric warheads create a wave of high pressure and heat that is capable of penetrating thick walls. The damage caused by thermobaric attack drones would cause damage that would be simply terrifying for the civilian population to endure, including collapsed lungs, crushed eyeballs, brain damage, according to sources familiar with Russian drone production. While controversial, however, thermobaric munitions are not prohibited under international law, though their deployment against civilian objects would be. Another thing that is not being dealt with in any way that would create effective deterrence, and this is North Korea, which has now provided Russia with 50 domestically produced self-propelled howitzers and 20 multiple launch rocket systems, MLRS. This was reported in the Financial Times on November 16th, citing a Ukrainian intelligence assessment. The additional support by Pyongyang came as 11,000 North Korean troops are massing in Russia's Kursk Oblast, training alongside Russian troops in its fight against Ukraine. A Pentagon spokesman said on November 13th that some North Korean troops have already been deployed to fight along with Russian forces. According to the Financial Times, some of the delivered weapons have been moved to the Kursk Oblast to assist in Russia's effort to regain control of the territory it lost to Ukrainian forces earlier this year. And of course, it is thought that Putin is pushing to retake those territories ahead of Trump coming into office and potentially some kind of peace negotiations or freezing of the lines of contact. Ukraine being in possession of territory in Russia, in Kursk, would significantly complicate such a negotiation, and it would certainly weaken Putin's hand. The reliability of North Korean-made weapons has previously come into question, with reports by South Korea's intelligence agency that Pyongyang has been sending some weapons that were made in the 1970s. North Korea has previously provided Russia with as many as 4.8 million artillery shells, South Korean Defense Minister Shin Wong-sik said in June, far outstripping what allies have supplied Ukraine. Both Kyiv and Washington have previously said that Russia has been using North Korean-produced missiles to attack Ukraine. Increased military support by Pyongyang started rolling into Russia after the signing of an agreement in June during Putin's visit to the North Korean capital. The agreement pledged to provide each other aid if either country is attacked, in addition to other military and humanitarian support. Well, now we come to the biggest story. Finally, yes, finally, Biden has authorized Ukraine to target Russia with US long-range missiles. US President Joe Biden has authorized Ukraine to use US-supplied long-range ATACMS for strikes inside Russia, marking a significant shift in US policy, but one which is long overdue and no doubt was put on ice during the election period. Not that that did the Democrats any good, but it did Ukrainian defenders considerable harm. Ukraine will likely initially use the weapons against Russian and North Korean forces in the Kursk oblast, but Washington could also authorize their use elsewhere. Undisclosed official sources told the news outlet. However, it seems that once more limits have been placed on their use. These are starting to dribble out in the media, and we'll talk more about that as more details are confirmed. We also do not have confirmation yet that Storm Shadow or Scalp can be used following this change of the US position. The decision comes as Russia, with the support of North Korean troops, prepares a large-scale assault on Ukrainian forces in the embattled Russian region. The policy change follows Biden's previous hesitance to provide such weapons out of concern for, quotes, escalating tensions with Russia. That, of course, anyone watching this channel will know that we believe that is an entirely bogus argument. It's an excuse for caution and inaction. Advocates of the decision have long argued that this authorization would significantly enhance Ukraine's defense capabilities, especially with Russia increasing military offensives on many fronts and intensifying drone and other kinds of long-range attacks in recent months. The talks on loosening US restrictions reportedly began after Defense Minister Rustem Umerov on 30th of August visited Washington and presented senior officials with a list of high-value targets in Russia that Ukraine wants to hit with Army Tactical Missile Systems ATACMS. Ukraine intends to strike Russian territory using those US-provided long-range munitions in the coming days, and it may be that that has already started with a major strike on a munitions site in Bryansk. Well, we will report on this as the story develops and we get more details. But here we are at day 1000 of the war, and few of the lessons seem to have been learnt by the Western allies about how you deal with Russian aggression and how you beat Russians. Signaling the supply of weapon systems before they can be effectively deployed is a terrible idea and makes no military sense. It allows Russians to potentially withdraw key equipment from the target areas. Putting limits on their usage makes this even easier for the Russians to accomplish. Once again, it seems like domestic political optics win out over military logic. Caution and self-deterrence win out over actually winning. And once again, Western allies increase support for Ukraine, but always, always after the time when this would have had a greater impact. And over 1,000 days of war, the results of these cautious and self-deterring policies has been that Ukraine has sustained terrible, terrible losses of its brave defenders. Many, many of those need not have happened if Ukraine had received the right munitions at the right time, in the right place, and in the right quantities. And if these had been aligned with some concept of Ukrainian victory. It's clear, however, none of that has happened 1,000 days in, and there is still no clear articulation on the Western side of what Ukrainian victory would look like and how that might be achieved.